It was the sight of the tow truck backing towards my classic Mustang that made my blood run cold. This wasn't just about a car. It was a declaration of war from a woman who thought a clipboard and a rulebook made her queen of the cul-de-sac. She'd threatened this for weeks, hiding behind petty fines and violation notices, but I never thought she'd actually have the audacity to try and steal my property from my own driveway. As I stepped outside, her smug smile said it all. She believed she had already won, but what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have calculated, was that her single power-drunk phone call was about to unleash a chain of events that would shatter her perfect little kingdom forever. She called the cops to destroy me, but why was that the one move I was secretly hoping she'd make? We moved into the quiet, tree-lined streets of Oak Ridge Estates, hoping for a fresh start. After 20 years of city noise and chaos, the promise of a peaceful, predictable community was a dream my wife, Sarah, and I had saved a decade for. I'd just taken a new demanding job that came with a significant amount of stress, and our new home was supposed to be my sanctuary. The centerpiece of that dream, the one purely selfish joy I allowed myself, was parked proudly in our driveway, a 1967 Ford Mustang, raven black. It wasn't just a car. It was the culmination of a childhood promise I'd made to myself, a project of passion I'd slowly restored with my own two hands over the years. The house was a modest but beautiful two-story colonial, and the driveway was just wide enough to keep the Mustang safely off the street. For the first few months, everything was perfect. Neighbors waved, kids played in their yards, and the only sounds were the rustle of oak leaves and the occasional purr of a lawnmower. I'd often spend my Saturday afternoons giving the Mustang a meticulous wash, the scent of soap and wax mingling with the cut grass. It was a simple, meditative ritual that grounded me. Sarah would bring me a glass of iced tea, smiling at how a simple car could bring me so much peace. That peace, however, had a gatekeeper. The Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association was famously strict, but we'd been assured the rules were about maintaining property values, not harassing residents. The president of this association was a woman named Brenda, who lived 3 houses down in an immaculately white home with perfectly symmetrical shrubbery. Our first interaction was her welcoming committee visit, which felt more like an inspection. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, didn't miss a detail. From the brand of our welcome mat to the specific shade of our curtains, she spoke with the clipped, formal tone of someone who deeply enjoys the sound of their own authority. The encounter was polite, but carried an unspoken threat. She handed me a binder thicker than most municipal codes. "We just like to keep things orderly," she'd said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "It's what makes Oak Ridge so special." Thanked her and tossed the binder on a shelf, thinking little of it. I'm a man who respects rules, but I also believe in common sense. My car was always clean, never leaked oil, and was parked entirely on my private property. It never occurred to me that my greatest source of joy could be seen as a problem. The first hint of trouble was a single typed note left under my windshield wiper. No hello, no signature, just a reference to a bylaw, Article 12, Section 4. Non-operational or project vehicles are not to be stored in visible areas of the property. I remember scoffing, crumpling the paper. My Mustang was as operational as it was beautiful. I started it every weekend. Its deep V8 rumble, a healthy, powerful sound that I would soon learn was the starting pistol for a war I never asked to fight. The response was not from the board, but from Brenda directly. Her email was a masterpiece of bureaucratic passive aggression. She ignored my evidence and questions entirely. Instead, she quoted another, even vaguer bylaw about maintaining the community's aesthetic harmony. She concluded with, "The board's determination on aesthetic matters is final. Compliance is expected." It wasn't a discussion. It was a decree. This is when the petty harassment began. The following Saturday, as I was buffing a fine scratch out of the Mustang's fender, a white sedan I recognized as Brenda's slowed to a crawl in front of my house. She didn't wave. She didn't stop. She just drove by at a funeral pace, her eyes fixed on my car and me, a silent rolling judgment. It was a psychological tactic, designed to make me feel watched and unwelcome in my own space. And it worked. The simple joy of working on my car was now tainted with a low hum of paranoia. The fine started next. A formal notice arrived. stating I was being levied a $50 daily fine for non-compliance. $50. Every single day. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about a car anymore. It was a financial siege. I appealed at the next HOA meeting. A stuffy affair held in a community clubhouse that smelled of lemon-scented disinfectant. Brenda presided from the head of the table, a gavel sitting ominously next to her water glass. When it was my turn to speak, I was calm, reasonable. I presented my documentation again. Brenda listened with a placid smile, then turned to her board. The issue is not the car's current state, but its potential to become an eyesore. It's a classic vehicle, which by its very nature is a restoration project waiting to happen. We are being proactive to protect everyone's property values. The logic was circular and maddening. I was being punished for a crime I might potentially commit in the future. The board, a group of retirees who seemed to live in fear of Brenda, voted unanimously to uphold the fines. The pressure was immense. Sarah, ever the peacemaker, suggested we just rent a storage unit to make it stop. It's not worth the stress. Or the money, she'd plead, watching me seethe over the stack of fine notices. But to me, it was about everything. It was about principle. If I capitulated on this, what would be next? The color of our shutters? The type of flowers in our garden? I felt the walls of my supposed sanctuary closing in, and a quiet, simmering rage began to replace my frustration. The conflict reached a new low when my son, Liam, who was 8, came home from playing at a friend's house in tears. He said a lady in a white car had stopped and told him that his daddy was a rule breaker and that we might have to move away because we were making the neighborhood ugly. That was the line. Using my child as a pawn in her petty power game transformed my rage into something cold and hard, something strategic. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a father defending his territory. I began to document everything. I installed a discreet, motion-activated camera facing the driveway. I logged every interaction, saved every email, and recorded the dates and times of Brenda's drive-bys. I was building a case, but for what, I wasn't yet sure. I was a man grasping for any tool within reach. The siege culminated in a final shocking escalation. I received a certified letter, not from the HOA, but from a law firm representing them. It was a final notice and demand for compliance. It stated that if the vehicle was not removed within 72 hours, the HOA would exercise its right of abatement. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the legalese. Right of abatement. I looked it up. It meant they were threatening to hire a towing company at my expense to steal my car right out of my own driveway. I stood there, holding the paper that felt like a declaration of war. The silence in my home deafening. They weren't just fining me anymore. They were coming for my property. They were coming for my Mustang. I looked out the window at the car, gleaming innocently in the sun, completely unaware of the battle it had started. Brenda had just made her ultimate move. She thought she had me cornered, out of options ready to surrender, but what she didn't know was that her threat had just handed me the one weapon. I needed to end this war once and for all. The 72-hour deadline expired at noon on a Tuesday. I had taken the day off, a strange calm settling over me. I wasn't anxious. I was waiting. I sat in my living room, the motion-activated camera on my phone live streaming the driveway. Sarah had taken Liam out for the day at my insistence. I didn't want them to see what might happen. Right on schedule at 12:15 p.m., a large flatbed tow truck rumbled onto our quiet street, its yellow lights flashing. It was an invasive industrial sound that didn't belong. My heart wasn't pounding with fear, but with a cold, focused anticipation. And behind the tow truck in her pristine white sedan was Brenda. She didn't park. She stopped in the middle of the street, a general arriving to survey the execution of her orders. I walked outside slowly, the screen door clicking shut behind me. The tow truck driver, a burly man with a clipboard, looked at me with an apologetic shrug. Sorry, buddy. HOA order. Before I could speak, Brenda was out of her car, marching up my driveway with an air of triumphant finality. The time for negotiations is over, she declared, her voice cutting through the neighborhood's peace. This eyesore is being removed. You can settle the impound fees directly with the company. I stood between her and my Mustang. Brenda, you need to call this off. Right now, get back in your car and drive away. This is your last chance to walk away from this. She let out a short, derisive laugh. Or what? You'll call the police? Go ahead. Let's see who they believe. A respected community leader, or a man with a junk car violating clear rules. A slow smile spread across my face. It was the move I had been waiting for her to make. Actually, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I already did. On cue. The distinct, authoritative chirp of a police siren echoed once, as a marked patrol car turned onto our street. Brenda's smug expression faltered for a second, replaced by confusion, then recalibrated into vindication. She truly believed the cavalry had arrived for her. The officer stepped out, his demeanor all business. Brenda immediately swooped in, her voice syrupy with false righteousness. Officer, thank you for coming. This man is violating a legally binding covenant and is refusing to comply. I need you to stand by while this vehicle is lawfully towed. The officer listened, then looked past her directly at me. His professional mask didn't even flicker. Sir? He said, giving me the floor. I didn't look at the officer. My eyes were locked on Brenda. The HOA president is correct about one thing, I began, my voice projecting so the neighbors starting to gather on their lawns could hear. This is about a legally binding authority, but she's mistaken about which one. I finally turned to the patrolman. Officer Evans, his status? In that moment, the entire world shifted for Brenda. Officer Evans stood a little straighter. All quiet, Chief. We have the situation monitored. The word hung in the air, sucking all the sound from the street. Chief, Brenda's face went through a terrifying transformation. The smug certainty melted into confusion, then morphed into dawning, gut-wrenching horror, as she looked from the young officer's respectful stance back to me. I wasn't just a frustrated homeowner anymore. I was the man who had sat through countless budget meetings with the city council, the man who signed this very officer's paycheck, the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the entire city. The color drained from her face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The power structure of her entire universe had just been inverted in a single, devastating second. I took a single step toward her, my voice low but carrying an unmistakable edge of absolute authority. Now, Brenda, I said, letting the silence stretch. Let's talk about that right of abatement. The silence on that driveway was louder than any siren. Brenda stood frozen, a statue of utter defeat. The tow truck driver, sensing the seismic shift in power, had already scurried back into his cab and shut off the engine. The low rumble fading away was the sound of her authority evaporating into the summer air. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The quiet, calm tone I used was far more terrifying. Officer Evans, I said, my eyes still locked on Brenda. Please inform the driver that any attempt to touch my vehicle will be considered attempted theft and trespassing. And then please ensure Mrs. Henderson and I are not disturbed. Yes, Chief, he replied, moving with a new sense of purpose to have a word with the now pale tow truck driver. I gestured for Brenda to follow me to my front porch, away from the prying eyes of the growing audience. She moved like a robot, her legs barely functioning. The clipboard, her symbol of power, hung limply at her side. When we were seated, I didn't start with the car. I started with my son. The first thing we are going to discuss is you approaching my 8-year-old child and emotionally manipulating him. I began, my voice like ice. You will explain to me right now what possessed you to think that was an acceptable tactic, and then you will consider very carefully what the legal and personal ramifications of that action could be. The fight was gone from her. The story tumbled out in a shaky, panicked whisper, a story of her believing she was protecting the community, of seeing my noncompliance as a disease that could spread. It was a confession born of sheer terror. I let her speak, let her sit in the profound discomfort of her own making. Then, I laid out the new terms of our relationship. First, all fines levied against me were to be rescinded immediately, with formal letters of retraction sent to my address and my credit reporting agencies, citing gross error by the HOA. Second, she would call an emergency meeting of the HOA board. At that meeting, she would personally advocate for the immediate amendment of the vague project vehicle bylaw, replacing it with a clear, common-sense rule based on a vehicle's operational status and registration, not its age or her personal aesthetic whims. Third, and this was non-negotiable, she would resign from her position as HOA president, effective upon the passage of the new bylaw. Her reign was over. She agreed to everything without a single word of protest, her head bowed in humiliation. The weapon she had used against Me, absolute authority, had just been turned on her with devastating finality. The aftermath was swift and satisfying. The emergency meeting was held. I attended not as a supplicant, but as a witness. When Brenda, her voice trembling, presented the new fair vehicle bylaw and announced her resignation, the shockwave through the community was palpable. The other board members, suddenly freed from her domineering shadow, voted it through unanimously. The culture of fear began to dissolve that very night. A week later, a new president was elected, a younger man who had always found Brenda's regime excessive. His first act was to personally deliver a formal apology from the entire board and a check reimbursing me for every single dollar I had paid in fines. The long-term consequences were even more profound. The HOA horror story of Brenda's downfall spread through Oak Ridge estates like wildfire, but it was told as a cautionary tale for those in power, not those under it. Petty enforcement vanished. The new board focused on genuine community building, organizing a block party, creating a community garden, instead of hunting for violations. The neighborhood became the peaceful, friendly place we had all originally hoped for. As for Brenda, she became a ghost in her own perfectly manicured home. She rarely left her house, and when she did, she would avert her eyes, quickly getting into her car and driving away. The empire of pettiness she had built had crumbled, and she was left with the hollow silence of her own defeat. She had tried to use the system to break me, and in the end the system, in the form of a much higher and more consequential authority, had broken her.